Everyone panics when they're told to wait. Staying put feels like weakness in a world addicted to motion. You're taught that if nothing is happening, you're falling behind. That stillness means failure. That patience is just fear dressed politely. So you move. You chase. You settle. You grab the nearest answer just to silence the noise in your head. And then you wonder why everything feels wrong even when it looks right. Being told to stay put isn't comfort, it's pressure. It forces you to sit with yourself without distractions, without substitutes, without pretending momentum equals progress. It strips away the illusion that effort alone guarantees alignment, because not everything arrives when you chase it. Some things only arrive when you stop interfering. Stillness isn't passive here, it's restraint, it's discipline. It's refusing to contaminate something rare with impatience. A divine partner doesn't rush into chaos. They don't respond to desperation or noise. They arrive when the space is clear, when the signal is clean, when you're no longer trying to force meaning out of loneliness. That's why staying put feels unbearable. It exposes how often you confuse movement with control and attention with connection. Waiting isn't about time passing. It's about you not breaking the alignment before it reaches you. People miss what's meant for them because they couldn't sit still long enough to let it arrive. They keep adjusting, redeciding, doubting the silence, filling the gap with the wrong presence just to feel chosen. Staying put is a test most fail quietly. Not because it's hard to wait, but because it's hard to trust that something real doesn't need to be chased, doesn't need to be hunted, doesn't need to be convinced. To come when it already knows exactly where you are. Stillness is misunderstood because it looks quiet on the outside while everything inside is screaming. People think discipline looks like action, like movement, like constant effort. They imagine strength as motion, noise, visible struggle. Stillness doesn't give them that satisfaction. It doesn't perform. It doesn't announce itself. It just sits there, forcing you to face everything you've been trying to outrun. Most people can move. Very few can stay. Staying put requires a kind of discipline that doesn't get praised because it can't be photographed or applauded. There's no visible progress, no immediate reward, no proof that you're doing the right thing. That's why stillness feels like weakness to those who don't understand it. They confuse silence with surrender and patience with fear. In reality, stillness is restraint. And restraint is one of the hardest forms of control. When you're still, you don't get to distract yourself with busyness. You don't get to numb discomfort by chasing something new. You don't get to hide behind motion. Stillness removes your favorite escape routes. It forces awareness. Every doubt gets louder. Every insecurity steps forward. Every unfinished thought demands attention. That's not weakness, that's exposure. And choosing to remain exposed without reacting impulsively takes discipline most people never develop. People run because movement feels productive. It gives the illusion of progress even when it's just avoidance in motion. They jump from connection to connection, goal to goal, noise to noise, because slowing down would mean admitting they don't trust the process. Stillness requires trust, not blind optimism, but grounded confidence that you don't need to interfere with everything to make it work. That kind of trust doesn't come easily. It has to be practiced. Stillness also challenges ego. Ego wants control, proof, validation. It wants to feel like it's doing something important. Stillness offers none of that. It asks you to sit with uncertainty without trying to dominate it, to resist the urge to manufacture outcomes just to feel powerful, to understand that forcing movement can actually break alignment instead of creating it. Discipline in stillness means resisting panic. It means not reaching for substitutes when loneliness whispers. It means not lowering standards just to avoid silence. It means watching opportunities pass and not grabbing them impulsively because they're available. not because they're right. That kind of discipline doesn't look heroic. It looks boring. It looks like nothing is happening. And that's exactly why it works. Most mistakes happen in moments of impatience, not because people lacked options, but because they lacked the discipline to wait. Stillness protects you from those mistakes. It acts like a filter, letting urgency burn itself out while clarity remains. Anyone can act when emotions are loud. Discipline is choosing not to act until emotions settle and truth becomes clear. Stillness also sharpens perception. When you stop moving, you start noticing patterns. You see what repeats. You recognize what drains you and what stabilizes you. Movement blurs these details. Stillness brings them into focus. That awareness is power, but only if you can tolerate the discomfort that comes with seeing things clearly. People who fear stillness often say they're afraid of missing out. What they're really afraid of is sitting long enough to realize what they've been chasing was never meant for them. Stillness doesn't steal opportunities. It exposes distraction. And exposure is threatening to anyone who's built their identity on constant motion. There's a reason stillness feels heavier than action. Action distributes energy outward. Stillness concentrates it inward. You feel everything more intensely. Doubt doesn't get diluted. Hope doesn't get numbed. Desire doesn't get scattered. You're forced to hold it all at once. That internal pressure is where discipline is forged. Stillness is not passivity, it's precision. It's choosing not to move until movement actually matters. It's understanding that timing is part of control. Acting too early can be just as destructive as acting too late. Discipline is knowing the difference and having the restraint to wait. Those who master stillness don't look impressive while they're waiting. They look ordinary, quiet, even stuck. But when the moment arrives, they don't scramble. They don't panic. They don't second guess. They move cleanly, decisively, without noise, because they weren't wasting energy chasing what wasn't aligned. Stillness is discipline because it requires you to trust something you can't see yet. To hold position without reassurance, to resist the urge to prove yourself through motion, to remain grounded while everything around you tells you to hurry, to settle, to compromise, to grab whatever is close just to feel chosen, and to stay exactly where you are while the world mistakes your restraint for weakness and your silence for fear. Impatience doesn't feel dangerous when it starts. It feels justified. It feels logical. It tells you that waiting is wasting time, that silence means nothing is happening, that if something mattered, it would arrive faster. Impatience convinces you that movement is always better than stillness, that action is safer than trust, and that belief quietly disrupts alignment long before you realize anything has gone wrong. Alignment is delicate. It isn't fragile, but it is precise. It depends on timing, readiness, and space. Impatience ignores all three. It rushes outcomes before the conditions are stable. It forces connections before clarity is present. It fills gaps that were meant to remain open, and once alignment is disrupted, everything that follows feels slightly off, even if it looks right from the outside. People sabotage alignment because they hate uncertainty. Waiting without proof feels unbearable. They want confirmation, signs, guarantees. Impatience offers relief by creating motion. It gives you something to do so you don't have to sit with doubt. But that relief is temporary. The cost shows up later when you realize you built something on the wrong timing and now you're stuck maintaining it. Impatience also distorts judgment. When you're rushing, you lower standards without noticing. You accept less clarity, less depth, less truth, just to escape the discomfort of waiting. You convince yourself that close enough is good enough, that maybe this is how it's supposed to feel. Alignment doesn't feel confusing, it feels calm. Impatience creates noise and then mistakes that noise for excitement. Most people don't ruin things by making bad decisions. They ruin things by making early ones. Decisions made under impatience aren't guided by wisdom, they're guided by anxiety. Anxiety wants immediate relief, not long-term harmony. It pushes you to grab what's available instead of waiting for what's aligned. And once you've grabbed the wrong thing, alignment has to work around the damage. Impatience doesn't just affect what you choose, it affects how you show up. When you rush, you bring desperation into spaces that require steadiness. You bring expectation into moments that need openness. You bring pressure into connections that need freedom. Alignment requires a clean signal. Impatience contaminates that signal with need, fear, and urgency. People often say they're tired of waiting. What they're really tired of is trusting something they can't control. Impatience is a reaction to powerlessness. It's the mind trying to reclaim control by forcing outcomes. But alignment doesn't respond to force. It responds to readiness. And readiness can't be rushed without consequences. There's also pride hiding inside impatience, a belief that you shouldn't have to wait, that if you're good enough, smart enough, deserving enough, things should move faster. That belief creates entitlement to timing. And timing doesn't care about entitlement. Alignment happens when all variables meet, not when impatience demands it. Impatience makes people misinterpret silence. Silence isn't rejection. Silence is space, it's room being cleared. It's preparation happening where you can't see it. But impatience treats silence as failure and rushes to fill it. And once filled, there's no room left for what was actually meant to arrive. Every time impatience wins, alignment adjusts, not to reward you, but to compensate. It reroutes, delays, or removes what no longer fits the altered conditions. People think impatience speeds things up. Often it slows everything down by creating detours that didn't need to exist. The hardest part about resisting impatience is that nothing immediately proves you were right to wait. There's no applause for restraint, no instant validation, just quiet. And quiet makes impatient minds restless. They mistake restlessness for intuition and move when they should stay still. Impatience also teaches the wrong lesson. It trains you to believe that discomfort must be escaped rather than understood. That waiting is punishment rather than preparation. Over time, this weakens trust in timing and replaces it with constant interference. Alignment becomes harder to maintain because you're always adjusting, always second-guessing, always interrupting the process. When alignment is intact, things arrive without force. There's less resistance, less confusion, less self-doubt. Impatience disrupts that flow by introducing urgency where there should be confidence. You start pushing doors that weren't locked, only to damage the frame and blame the door for not opening smoothly. The truth is, impatience doesn't come from desire alone. It comes from fear that nothing is coming at all, and that fear convinces people to move prematurely, to choose substitutes, to interfere with timing they don't fully understand. Alignment doesn't punish impatience immediately. It lets you learn through misalignment, through friction, through the subtle sense that something is wrong even when everything looks fine, through the realization that what you rushed into required far more effort than what would have arrived naturally if you had trusted the space long enough to let it reach you intact. Movement feels powerful. It looks decisive. It gives you the illusion that you're doing something right. In a world that worships speed, standing still feels like falling behind. So people move even when they don't know where they're going. They walk faster, choose quicker, commit earlier, fill space just to prove they're alive. And that constant motion quietly sabotages what was actually trying to reach them. Not everything arrives through pursuit. Some things require you to be exactly where you are, unchanged, unpanicked, unaltered. Movement disrupts signal. It blurs coordinates. When you keep shifting, adjusting, chasing, you're telling the universe or life, or timing, or whatever you want to call it, that you don't trust it to find you. So you interfere. You reroute yourself out of alignment, and then wonder why what arrives feels slightly wrong. People mistake movement for readiness. They think if they stay active, they're proving commitment. But readiness isn't about motion. It's about position, being in the right place internally, emotionally, mentally. When you keep moving, you don't let that position stabilize. You don't let clarity settle. You don't let space hold. You're always in transition, and things meant to arrive cleanly need stability, not chaos. Movement also creates noise. Every action sends a signal. Every chase sends a message. When you move out of impatience, the signal is distorted by urgency, fear, and doubt. What's meant for you isn't responding to desperation. It's responding to alignment. And alignment doesn't shout. It resonates. Constant motion drowns that resonance out. There's a reason people often say they met the right person at the wrong time. The timing wasn't wrong. The movement was. Someone shifted when they should have stayed. Someone chased when they should have waited. Someone filled space that needed to stay empty. Arrival missed because the destination wouldn't stop relocating. Movement can also come from insecurity, a fear that staying still means being forgotten, that if you don't act, you'll be passed over. So you prove your worth through motion. You show up everywhere. You say yes too fast. You commit before clarity. But what's meant for you doesn't require proof of worth. It arrives because of resonance, not performance. When you move too much, you start accepting substitutes. Not because they're right, but because they're there. Availability starts looking like destiny. Activity starts looking like progress. And the real thing, the one that needed you to stay exactly where you were, arrives to an empty space and moves on without announcement. Movement also changes you, not always for the better. Every unnecessary step shapes habits, compromises standards, adjusts expectations. You become someone slightly different with every rushed decision. And by the time what was meant to arrive finally gets close, you're no longer who it was aligned with. Not because you grew, but because you drifted. People don't like admitting that stillness is a form of courage. It feels counterintuitive. But staying put while everything in you wants to run takes more strength than chasing the next distraction. Movement gives relief. Stillness gives truth. And truth is uncomfortable when you've been using motion to avoid it. Arrival requires recognition, and recognition requires presence. If you're always in motion, you're rarely present. You're planning the next step, the next move, the next adjustment. You miss subtle signals. You overlook quiet confirmation. You're too busy moving to notice what's already approaching. There's also timing. Some things have momentum of their own. They're already on their way. But when you move impulsively, you change the timing relationship. You arrive too early, too late, or somewhere else entirely. And then you call it bad luck instead of interference. Movement feels safer because it gives the illusion of control. Stillness requires trust. Trust that what's meant for you doesn't need to be hunted. Trust that alignment doesn't require constant adjustment. Trust that staying put isn't stagnation but precision. The irony is that people often move because they're afraid nothing is happening. But the most important things happen quietly. Preparation happens unseen. Alignment forms without noise. Arrival doesn't rush. It coordinates. And coordination fails when the target won't stop moving. When you stop chasing, you stop scattering energy. When you stop scattering energy, you become clearer. When you become clearer, arrival becomes easier, not because you earned it through effort, but because you finally stopped getting in the way. Movement isn't always wrong, but unnecessary movement is sabotage disguised as ambition. It interrupts processes that require patience. It confuses signals that require clarity. It replaces trust with interference and calls it effort. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is move when you were supposed to stay, because what's meant to arrive doesn't chase, it finds. And it can only find you if you're where you're supposed to be, not proving, not panicking, not running, just present, enough to be recognized. When it finally reaches the place you abandoned too soon, waiting isn't about time passing. It's about what happens inside you when nothing external reassures you. Anyone can feel confident when things are moving, when messages arrive, when doors open, when signs are loud. Self-trust doesn't show up there. It hides in the silence, in the gaps, in the moments where nothing confirms. You're right, and you have to decide whether you believe yourself anyway. Most people don't actually trust themselves. They trust reactions, attention, feedback, noise. They trust movement because movement feels like proof. Waiting removes all of that. No applause, no validation, no reassurance that you're not wasting your life. Just you, your thoughts, and the unsettling question of whether you know what you're doing without external confirmation. Waiting exposes how quickly people panic when they're not being chosen, chased, or rewarded. The moment nothing happens, doubt creeps in. Maybe I missed my chance. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I should do something, anything, just to feel in control again. That's the moment where self-trust either appears or collapses. Because if you trust yourself, you don't flinch at silence. You understand that absence of movement doesn't mean absence of progress. People who lack self-trust interpret waiting as rejection. They assume nothing is happening because they're not enough. That belief pushes them to interfere. They settle early, speak too soon, move too fast, lower standards just to escape uncertainty. Waiting becomes unbearable because it mirrors their fear that they don't deserve what they're waiting for. Self-trust doesn't announce itself loudly. It's quiet. It doesn't need to convince anyone. It simply holds position. When you trust yourself, you don't need to rush to prove your worth. You don't need to chase validation. You don't need to fill space with substitutes. You understand that what's meant for you isn't confused about where to find you. Waiting also reveals whether your confidence is real or borrowed. Borrowed confidence depends on outcomes. It exists only when things go your way. Real self-trust exists before results. It allows you to stay grounded even when the timeline doesn't make sense yet. It keeps you from betraying your own standards just to feel chosen temporarily. There's a reason waiting makes people restless. It strips away distractions. You can't hide behind productivity, flirting, planning, or constant motion. You're left alone with your intentions. And intentions are uncomfortable when you're not sure you trust them. Waiting forces you to confront whether you actually believe in your own judgment, or if you've been relying on circumstances to decide for you. When you trust yourself, waiting doesn't feel like punishment. It feels intentional. It feels like holding a line instead of wandering aimlessly. You don't interpret every delay as a sign to quit or change direction. You understand that not everything unfolds at the pace your anxiety prefers. People who don't trust themselves constantly look outward for permission. They need signs, signals, approval, confirmation. Waiting denies them all of that. It's cruel in that way. It asks you to stand by your decision without evidence, to remain consistent without feedback, to believe without guarantees. Self-trust means you don't abandon yourself the moment things get quiet. You don't panic and rewrite your story every time the timeline stretches. You don't confuse impatience with intuition. Waiting tests whether you can sit with uncertainty without turning against your own judgment. There's also fear hiding inside waiting. Fear that if you wait and nothing comes, you'll have to admit you were wrong. Self-trust accepts that risk. It understands that trusting yourself doesn't mean you'll never be disappointed. It means you won't destroy your integrity just to avoid discomfort. Waiting reveals how much you respect yourself. If you truly trust yourself, you won't accept replacements for what you know you want. You won't dilute your standards just because something is available. You won't betray your intuition to escape loneliness. You'll stay put, not because it's easy, but because you know who you are when you're not desperate. People who rush often say they're tired of waiting. What they're really tired of is being alone with their own thoughts. Waiting forces you to listen. And listening reveals whether your confidence is solid or fragile. Self-trust doesn't need speed. It needs consistency. It doesn't need proof. It needs patience. Waiting isn't about hoping blindly. It's about believing that your inner compass doesn't suddenly stop working just because the path isn't visible yet. Those who trust themselves don't chase every opportunity. They don't flinch at delays. They don't rewrite their worth based on timing. They understand that staying put is sometimes the clearest signal of confidence, that holding position can be louder than action, that waiting isn't empty when it's grounded in trust. That silence does threaten them because they're not afraid of their own judgment, not afraid of being still long enough to see whether what they believe about themselves can survive without applause, without movement, without immediate answers, just standing there, steady, unprovoked, intact. Substitutes don't announce themselves as compromises. They arrive dressed as solutions. They show up when you're tired, when waiting feels humiliating, when silence starts whispering doubts you don't want to hear. They look close enough, sound reasonable enough, feel comforting enough to convince you that maybe this is it, maybe this is what you were waiting for all along. And that's how the delay begins. Most people don't miss what's real because it never came. They miss it because they were already occupied. Substitutes fill space. They take time, attention, energy. They distract you just enough to make you unavailable when the real thing tries to arrive. And the worst part is you usually defend them. You call them practical, mature, realistic. You say you're done waiting, done hoping, done believing in something better. Substitutes thrive on impatience. They need you tired of trusting timing. They need you uncomfortable with emptiness. Because emptiness is dangerous to substitutes. Empty space is an invitation. It's where alignment happens. It's where what's real has room to enter. Substitutes rush to occupy that space before something meaningful can. People settle into substitutes because they're afraid of looking foolish for waiting, afraid of being alone, afraid of admitting they want more than what's available. So they accept half connections, half dreams, half clarity, and tell themselves it's enough. And for a while, it almost is. Almost is the most deceptive word there is. Substitutes don't usually hurt at first. They numb, they quiet the ick. They give you routine, familiarity, distraction. But slowly something starts to feel off. You feel heavier instead of lighter, drained instead of energized, confused instead of clear. That's the cost of delay. Every day spent entertaining the wrong thing is a day the right thing has to wait longer or work harder to reach you. What makes substitutes dangerous is that they imitate progress. They make you feel like you're moving forward when you're actually standing in the way. They keep you busy enough to avoid confronting the truth that you chose comfort over alignment. And comfort is loud. It demands justification. Alignment is quiet. It doesn't argue. It just waits for space. People often say the real thing never came. What they mean is it never came while they were watching. But arrival doesn't knock. It observes. And when it sees that you're distracted, compromised, emotionally occupied, it doesn't fight for attention. It doesn't compete with substitutes. It withdraws, not out of punishment, but out of precision. Substitutes also change you. They adjust your expectations downward. They teach you to tolerate less. They normalize dissatisfaction. Over time, you forget what full resonance feels like. You start believing that dull is stable and intensity is unrealistic. And when something real finally appears, it feels unfamiliar, even threatening, because you've trained yourself to survive on less. The tragedy isn't choosing a substitute once. It's defending it long after you know it's wrong. People protect their substitutes because admitting the truth would mean facing wasted time. So they double down. They commit harder. They convince themselves that effort will turn the wrong thing into the right one. It doesn't. It just deepens the delay. Substitutes don't just delay arrival. They distort timing. They create emotional clutter. They complicate exits. The longer you stay, the harder it becomes to leave without damage. And the more damage there is, the less ready you feel for what's real when it finally approaches. What's real doesn't need convincing. It doesn't require you to ignore your intuition. It doesn't ask you to shrink, settle, or silence parts of yourself. Substitutes do. They survive on your self-betrayal. Every time you override your inner voice, you strengthen them. People often confuse peace with numbness. Substitutes specialize in numbness. They remove the sharp pain of waiting, but they also remove the sharp clarity of truth. And without clarity, you wander in circles, telling yourself you're moving on while actually standing still. The cruel part is that substitutes feel safer than waiting. Waiting exposes hope. Substitutes hide it. They give you something to point to when people ask questions, something to lean on when doubt gets loud. But safety built on avoidance isn't safety. It's delay with padding. What's real doesn't arrive to chaos, it arrives to readiness, and readiness requires space. Emotional space, mental space, energetic space. Substitutes occupy all of it. They clutter the doorway, and then complain nothing good comes through. Letting go of substitutes feels like loss at first, because you're giving up something tangible for something unseen. That's terrifying. But holding on to them costs you something far greater: alignment, timing, authenticity. The real thing doesn't punish you for past substitutions. It doesn't judge the detours, but it won't force itself into a life that's already full of the wrong attachments. It waits until the noise quiets, until the space clears, until you stop feeding the distractions that delay it. Substitutes are convincing because they promise relief now. What's real promises resonance later, and most people choose now because later requires trust. Trust that something better exists. Trust that waiting isn't foolish. Trust that you don't need to grab what's closest just to avoid being alone with yourself. The moment you stop entertaining substitutes, the timeline shifts, not instantly, not dramatically, but precisely. Space opens, signals clear, you become visible again. And what was delayed doesn't rush. It approaches calmly, deliberately, unannounced, because it was never lost, never confused, just waiting for you to stop settling long enough to be available. When it finally reaches the place you cleared by choosing emptiness over compromise, silence over distraction, and truth over temporary comfort,